All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. An incredible and beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Sammy and Malka Esterson for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in memory and commemoration of the yahrzeits of their parents, Yitzchak Laib ben Aharon HaKohen, Sarah Rachel bas Baruch Avraham, Hinda bas Henech Efraim. Our week, we hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating the shiurim this week in memory of Paul's sister, Zachrini Shulamis bas Shmuel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Hillel Saklov, in memory of his brother Elio ben Avraham Abba, and Yankee and Eliza Statman in commemoration of the yahrzeit of the Yankee's sister Shendel Stein, Shendel Menucha, Shendel Yehudis Bas Zichron Livracha Bas David Yosef. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And we'll say with that, let us. Did I say yahrzeit? For the shloshim. Did I say? Okay. Jose, so with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Lamed Gimel. We are picking up Emeretz Hashem at the Mishnah on Lamed Beis Amud Beis. It says the Mishnah, bottom Mishnah, second to last Mishnah, I should say. However, the Fnei we'll say a really beautiful Gemara ahead of us today. However, the Fnei B'Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashana, a person who davens for the Amud on Rosh Hashana. So the Gemara says, Hasheni Maskia. Ultimately, again, the Baal Musaf is the one who blows the shofar. So we'll see why the Mishnah is mentioning this, because this is creating a contrast. So on Rosh Hashanah, the person who goes ahead and davens Musaf, that's when Tkiyah Shofar takes place. Ubishas Hallel, but on a Yom Tov, when there is Hallel, Harishon Makreas Hallel. The first person, i.e. the Baal Shachris, davens Hallel. So the Mishnah creating a contrast on Rosh Hashanah. So ultimately, Tkiyah Shofar is done by Musaf, and by Yom Tiv when there is Hallel. So Hallel is done by Shachris. It says the Gemara, Maishna Sheni Maskia. Why is it that on Rosh Hashanah we wait until Musaf to go out and do Tkiyah Shofar? Why not go out and do Tkiyah Shofar already by Shachris? Mishum Diberov Am Hadros Melech. Gemara, very beautiful Gemara. Because, interesting, some things don't change. There are more people in Shul by Musaf than there are by Shachris. Just the way the Jewish people works. So therefore, again, says the Gemara, Berovam Hadras Melech, the king experiences greater sanctification when there is a greater assembly of people. So he dafka wait until Musaf to go ahead and blow shofar, because that's a greater covet to the mitzvah. Ihachi halal nami nema b'sheni. If that's the case, why not go ahead and say halal by Musaf as well? Just by Stami Yom Tiv, that should be true as well. Wait to say halal during Musaf. To which the Gemara says, Mishum dizrizin makdim mitzvahs. Ultimately, again, because by halal we'll say zrizin makdim mitzvahs. So the Gemara, so remember, zrizin makdim mitzvahs says, in general, part of the covet we display for a mitzvah is an eagerness, a zeal, a sense of alacrity, a quickness in performing the mitzvah. So therefore, we're going to say halal by Shachris because reason makdim mitzvahs. Well, if that's the case, tzkiya nami navid berishon mishum reason makdim mitzvahs. So again, but I can use that same logic by tkiyah shofar. And we'll say even more by tkiyah shofar. Tkiyah shofar is a mitzvah d'oraisa. It's a biblical obligation. So all the more so, I should do it first thing in the morning because of zrizos. So we'll say this is incredible. Some Rabbi Yochanan b'shas gezeras malchus shanu. You're right, but the reason they went ahead and they switched Tkiyah Shofar to Musaf was because of a gezeras malchus, a decree by the Gentile government. So what is this talking about? So interesting enough, we see a fascinating machlokes Rashi Tosas here. So if you look at Rashi says b'shas gezeras malchus shanu. Oibim gazru shlo yisku vayu arve lahem kol sheish shos leketz tfilas shachris. Rashi says that there was a governmental decree against blowing the shofar. Not allowed to blow the shofar. And what happened? The government would send spies. Again, it's not clear from Rashi when exactly historically this particular edict occurred, but the government would go, the king, the monarchy would send spies and place them in shuls to make sure that the Jews were not going ahead and blowing shofar. So apparently the spies were embedded there in the morning, right? But once Shachar is finished, once Kriyas Torah reading finished, so they assumed at that point in time, so Tkiyas Shofar was not going to occur, and therefore the Jews would wait until the spies left, they'd blow Shofar by Musaf. So interestingly enough, according to Rashi, that's how the practice evolved, to push Tkiyas Shofar to Musaf, and even once the governmental decree ended, they left it there. Tosfos understands a little bit differently. If you look at Tosfos says, "B'shas gzeres malchus v'afa pi shabat legzeres hamalchus lo avdinon k'demei ikara." So Tosfos says, by the way, now there's no governmental decree, right? There's no Baruch Hashem, there's no governmental decree. Tosfos says, even though there's no governmental decree, we leave the practice as it was done, namely Tkiyas Shofar for Musaf. Afa Gav, there's reason makdim l'mitzvahs. D'chashin, listen to Tosfos. D'chashinon shemi yachzor davar lekilkulo. What are we concerned about? We're concerned that maybe there'll be another governmental decree, right? We're concerned that ultimately, again, perhaps something like this will come up. Which I will say is so incredibly profound that Tosfos highlighting the plight of the diaspora Jew, never knowing what particular enactment is going to be legislated against the Jewish people. So Tosfos says, just leave Tkiyas Shofar in Musaf. Now look what he writes. The Pirush Yerushalmi nechatfei demefari sham shedamu ha'oivim shenis asfu liskoa truas milchama va'amdu aleim b'hargum ulekach tiknum tkiyos u'brachas b'musaf dechi chazu dekara b'kriyas shema mispalim v'korim b'torah dechozun sam b'token acharei b'ni musayhu inan askinan. So we'll say, Tosfos says something different. Tosfos is not close to Yerushalmi. This is incredible. And the Yerushalmi says, no. This was a result of a different episode. One time, again, no one's clarifying for us when exactly these events occurred. But Tosfos says one time the Jews were gathered in shul. They're blowing shofar. The Gentile authorities mistook the blowing of the shofar as a Jewish call to arms. As a result, Jewish insurgency. As a result, Tosfos points out that there was a massacre. There was a massacre against the Jewish people because it was perceived that the blowing of the shofar was a call to arms against an insurgency. So as a result, Chazal stood up and they moved Tkiyas Shofar to Musaf. Why to Musaf? Because this way, when the Gentiles around us see that we're davening, right? They see Shachris, they see Kriyas Torah, they'll understand Tkiyas Shofar is a part of Tefillah and not a call to a revolt. So interestingly enough, a little bit of a different approach between Rashi and Tosfos, right? Rashi telling us that we moved it to Musaf as a result of a governmental decree against Tkiyas Shofar to avoid spies or things like that. We just pushed it to later on in davening. Tosfos says it was a result of a massacre against the Jewish people as a result of thinking that Tkiyas Shofar was a call to arms. We moved it to Musaf, therefore everyone sees that it's a chelik of tefillah. Either way, what's fascinating, according to both Rashi and Tosfos, is that halacha l'maaseh, even though the decree or the concern is no longer here, the practice remained of leaving Tkiyas Shofar in Musaf, even though Zrizin Makdimin Lemitzvahs would normally require us to do it first thing. So let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara goes right. So the Gemara says, Midikar b'shas halal, michlal de Rosh Hashana leka halal. They're both saying, here's what's interesting. The Mishnah makes a contrast between Tkiyas Shofar and Halal. Tkiyas Shofar is done by Musaf, Halal is done by Shachris. You could infer from this Gemara or from the Mishnah that what? There is no Halal on Rosh Hashana. So my timer, why don't we say Halal on Rosh Hashana? So Rabbi Abo, this is so beautiful. Rabbi Abo, Amru Malachi Ashar Sifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Malachi Ashares said before the Ribono Shalom, Ribono Shalom, Mipnei Ma Ein Yisrael Omrim Shira Lefanecha B'Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim. The Malachim ask this Shaila to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They say, Ribono Shalom, why doesn't Klal Yisrael say Halal before you on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? So listen to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds. Amar Lahem, Efshar Melech Yoshev Al Kisei Din V'Sifrei Chaim V'Sifrei Mesim Psuchim Lefanav. Is it possible that the king sits on the throne of judgment? The books of life and death are open before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Yisrael Omrim Shira, and Klal Yisrael should say Halal. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to the Malachim. When life and death is being decided, judgment is being levied against the entire world, it could be that the jubilant nature of Halal perhaps is not appropriate for the day of Osei. But what's interesting to note is it's the Malachim who say, why the Malachim bringing this up, right? Why the Malachim asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribbon Shalom, why isn't Klal Yisrael saying Hallel? So I'll say perhaps it's because the Malachim more than anyone, the angels more than anyone, see the incredible compassion of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's true that there's din. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sitting on the throne of justice, the book of life, the book of death, everything is open. But the Malachim more than anyone see how much the Ribono Shel Olam tries to go ahead and give Klal Yisrael a positive din. They see more than anyone how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is dan lekaf sechus, gives us the benefit of the doubt. They see more than anyone how the Ribono Shel Olam wants so badly, yearns and pines, to give us a second chance. I will say, isn't this incredible? So from the Malachim's perspective, they're like, Jews, why aren't you saying Hallel? What an incredible day. What an overwhelming day. It's true, it's judgment, but you have a God. You have a God who advocates for you. So I will say, normally, a judge is not permitted to be an advocate, right? A judge is supposed to be an impartial third party. It's not true with our judge. Our judge, the Ribono Shel Olam, is also an advocate. And the greatest advocate we have happens to be the very entity that judges us as well. And therefore, he could be dan lekaf sechus. Therefore, he could go ahead and judge us not just on what was and what is, but because he sees what will be and what we could accomplish and how we can make changes. So the Malachim see this and they say, this is absolutely incredible. This is absolutely incredible. A judge who advocates, a judge who simultaneously sits on the throne of Din and Rachamim. Klal Yisrael, you need to be saying Shira. You need to be saying Shira. Incredible. The Malachim could often see the dynamic on Rosh Hashana that we cannot see. And therefore, ultimately, the Malachim say Hallel. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no, the Jews are scared. The Jews are scared, right? It's an overwhelming day. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, as much as, again, they have overtones of simcha and of hope and optimism, they're overwhelming days, and therefore it's not appropriate to ask them to say Hallel. Incredible. Posei Mishnah. Shofar Rosh Hashanah ma'avir alavas atchum. So we'll say, as much as there's a mitzvah to blow shofar, you're not allowed to violate an avira, even an isur d'Rabbanan, in order to go ahead and blow shofar. So for example, let's say your shofar is out of the tchum, out of the boundary. You're not allowed to go ahead and get it, right? Let's say there's a pile of stones on top of the shofar. You can't remove the stones. Muktzah. Lo olin be'ilan. If your shofar's in a tree, you can't go up and retrieve the shofar. Climbing a tree is asr min d'Rabbanan. You're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. V'lo rochun al gabi behema. Similarly, again, let's say the only way to retrieve your shofar is to get on an animal, ride the animal. Remember, you're not allowed to ride an animal on Shabbos, or Yom Tov for that matter. V'lo shatan al pnei hamayim. Let's say your shofar is floating in the river. You're not allowed to swim to get the shofar because swimming is asr. We learned all this. Swimming is asr min d'Rabbanan. Vein chotchen also. Bein b'davar shum mishum shvus. Bein b'davar shum mishum lo sasa. But you're not allowed to cut it. Now, interestingly enough, we're just going to go with the approach of Rashi over here. That cutting it, we're going to see on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, cutting it doesn't mean detaching the horn from the animal. Cutting it means, if you ever see how a shofar is made, so it's not just the pshat that you cut it off the head of the animal and you're good to go. There's a whole bunch of stuff inside of the shofar, right? There's cartilage, there's stuff in there that has to be cleaned out. It's called smoothing out. So that's what it means, according to Rashi, that's what it means over here. With the smoothing out of the shofar, the emptying out of the contents of the shofar, the smoothing out of the shofar, you're not allowed to do that. Either with something that's, meaning with a utensil, that's asr midrabanan, or with something that is an isur d'oraisa. Again, we'll qualify that in Mirat Hashem on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Aval imratzah. So therefore, essentially, what the Gemara is saying is as follows: you're not allowed to violate an isur d'Rabbanan or an isur d'oraisa to perform the mitzvah of shofar. However, but if you want to put some water or some wine inside of the shofar, yitain, you can do that. You can do that. Now, I will say, interestingly enough, that would be a cleaning out of the shofar, right? So let's say you want to just clean out the shofar with some wine or with some water, you're allowed to do that. Rashi points out over here, and we don't say that that is tikkun mana. We don't call that the fixing of a utensil, which would be an isser as well. So we'll say in general, we don't prevent kids from blowing shofar. So we'll define the parameters of this. But what this sounds like over here is if a child picks up a shofar the pashtos are talking about on Shabbos and wants to blow it, we don't tell him no. Rather, we actively engage ourselves with them until they become proficient in blowing shofar. Again, we'll define the parameters of that. Lo yatsa. And Abba says is an interesting case as well. Misasek, what we will see generally means someone who is not really involved in Tikiyah shofar, but goes ahead and produces kolos. So for example, let's say someone is holding a shofar to their mouth, and they just let out a big sigh. But it's mamish a sigh to the point that it produces a tikiyah, a shvarim, and a tikiyah, right? Perfect kolos. But it was a sigh. That's called misasek. I had no intention to blow the shofar. It just happened to be I produced these kolos. You're not yotzei. With right, tikiyah shofar requires kavana. And obviously, not only is the person who blew not yotzei, but even someone who hears from someone else who is misasek is also not yotzei. The Gemara is going to say, isn't that obvious? We'll discuss. Says the Gemara, my timer. So we'll say, this is very interesting, because think about this for just a moment. Why am I not allowed to violate Yom Tiv in order to blow shofar? Right? Why am I not allowed to violate? After all, the Gemara is my timer. Shofar asehu. Remember, shofar is a mitzvah aseh, is a positive commandment. The Yom Tiv aseh velo saseh. We'll say the sanctity of Yom Tiv, right? Or I should say the idea of malacha on Yom Tiv is governed by both an aseh, a positive commandment, and a lo saseh, and the prohibition. And therefore in halacha we know ve'ein aseh doches lo saseh v'aseh. So we'll say it's a very simple calculation. Shofar is an aseh. The sanctity of Yom Tiv, not violating malacha, is an aseh and a lo saseh. So therefore the aseh of shofar does not override an aseh and a lo saseh of Yom Tiv. So quite amazing. Quite amazing. Says the olun be'ilan v'lo rochnu al gabi behema. So we'll say, so remember, what the Mishnah did was as follows. The Mishnah essentially tells us that you're not allowed to violate a daraisa, and then in order to blow shofar, because again, we'll say that's what the first line of the Mishnah is talking about over here, right? Shofar is an aseh, a mitzvah aseh daraisa. Yom Tiv has an aseh, a lo saseh daraisa. Therefore, you can't violate Yom Tiv to fulfill the mitzvah of shofar. So now, after that, what does the Mishnah do? The Mishnah goes through a list of rabbinic malachos that you're not allowed to violate in order to blow shofar. It says the Gemara, I don't understand. Last line. Hashta drabanan amrit lo daraisa miboy. So I'll say, I don't understand. If you're already telling me that you're not allowed to go ahead and violate the rabbanans, doesn't it go without saying that what? You can't violate the daraisa? To which the Gemara says, you're right. Zu ve'in tzarech lomar zu katani. But say sometimes stylistically, the way a Mishnah is set up is that a Mishnah ultimately, again, will include, we'll say zu, we'll say a, and of course it goes without saying b. So in this case, again, the way the Mishnah is set up is you can't violate isurei dirabanan in order to go ahead and blow shofar. And all the more so, even though it doesn't require any mention, you can't violate biblical law as well. Incredible. Top of Lamed Gimel. Bein chotchin osa, bein bedavar shum mishum shvus, bein bedavar shum mishum lo sasa. So both say, and again, so the Mishnah said, in chotchin. Now this is where Rashi, look at top Rashi, Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. Rashi says, in chotchin osa, in balit takno. See, as I mentioned before, according to Rashi, chotcho doesn't mean you're detaching it from the animal. Chotcho means you're cutting away, right? You're smoothing out the shofar. So Rashi says in balasakno, lo b'davar shumishum shvus, kli she'ein darko lachtoch bo shofar. So both says we're going to see as follows. So the Mishnah said you're not allowed to smooth out a shofar, neither with a utensil that's normally used for this purpose, in which case it would be an Isser Daraisa, or with a utensil that's not normally used for this purpose, in which case it would be an Isser Derabanan. To which the Gemara says, which utensil is which? Here we go. Mishum Shvus Magla. So we'll say, for example, when would it be an Isser Derabanan if you were to use a sickle? So if you were to use a sickle to smooth out a shofar, why is that an Isser Derabanan? Because that's not the normal way you smooth out a shofar. So we'll say, any time on Shabbos or Yom Tiv, you do a malacha in a non-normative way, you relegate you relegate that malacha to a dirabanan. So therefore, if you were to go ahead and smooth out a shofar with a sickle is not the instrument or the implement that's normally used for this. Therefore, if you were to do it, it'd be an isser dirabanan. However, lo saseh, when would it be an isser daraisa? Sakina, a knife. So a knife is normally used to smooth out a shofar, a sickle is not. So therefore the Mishnah says, if you were to use a knife to smooth out a shofar to ready it for use on Rosh Hashanah, it'd be an Issa D'Oraisa. If you were to use a sickle, it'd be an Issa D'Rabbanan. So it says the Gemara. So we'll say, so remember again, what's the theme of the Mishnah? The theme of the Mishnah is, all I have at my disposal is an unfinished shofar. Has to be smoothed out. So the Mishnah says, you can't smooth it out. And you can't smooth it out with a sickle, that's an Issa D'Rabbanan. And you can't smooth it out with a knife, that's an Issa D'Oraisa. So once again, the Gemara asks, Hashta mishum shavus amrit lo sasami bai. So I'll say, once you tell me that I'm not allowed to violate an Issa D'Rabbanan, i.e., smooth out the shofar with a sickle, doesn't it go without saying that what? That I can't smooth it out with a knife, that's an Issa D'Oraisa? Once again, zu vein tzarech lomar zum katani. Both say, so we once again see the style of the Mishnah is what we call a zu vein tzarech lomar zu model. We say one thing, and even though you don't need to say the second thing, we say it anyway. So you're right. Once you tell me that I'm not allowed to violate an Issa D'Rabbanan for the sake of preparing the shofar, it goes without saying that what? That I can't violate an Issa D'Oraisa, but the Mishnah says it anyway. Beautiful. Avalim ratza litain l'socho mayim o yayin yitain. I will say, but the Mishnah did say that if you want to place wine or water in the shofar. Now remember, why are you placing wine or water in the shofar? To clean it out. But you're allowed to do that because that's not called tikkun mana. That's not called fixing it. So the Gemara says, mayim o yayin in, meiraglayim lo. You could use wine or water, but not urine. Not urine. You may also have difficulty finding a Baal Tokea, right? If you go ahead and keep urine in the shofar, but again, different discussion. Says the Gemara, masnisin money. So whose opinion does this reflect? Abba Sholhi. So we'll say, so what's the issue, technically speaking, with keeping urine in the shofar? This time Abba Shol Omer, mayim o yayin motak tzachzecho. You're allowed to put water. So we'll say it would have been common to wash out the shofar. Just after a certain amount of use, you would wash out the shofar. So water or wine is fine. Meiraglayim aser mipnei hakavod. Urine is going to be aser because that is considered to be a degradation of the mitzvah. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, what the Gemara suggests over here is as follows. So again, remember, what's important for us is that even though putting wine or water through it is for the benefit of the utensil, it doesn't qualify as even an Isser D'Rabbanan of Tikkun Mana, of fixing something. Therefore, it's permitted. Good. We'll say now an interesting piece. We do not go ahead and prevent children from blowing shofar in Rosh Hashanah. Right? So if a child, and I will say this is obviously talking about on Shabbos, so if a child wants to go ahead and start blowing the shofar, we don't stop them from doing so. So the Gemara makes an amazing observation. The Gemara says, Ha-nashim ma'akvan. It would appear that if a woman were to want to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos, then we would stop her from doing so. So we'll say, now watch this. This is fascinating. Vatanya, ein ma'akvin lo'es ha-nashim lo'es ha-tinokas mu'izkal b'yamtiv. So that says, whether women or children want to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, Shabbos, we don't stop them from doing so. So how do you reconcile that with our Mishnah, the Mishnah only says by children you don't stop them from blowing, but by women you would. So what's the pshat? Let's listen to this. Rabbi Lokashya, ha-Rebbe Yehuda, ha-Rebbe Yosef, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi say this comes down to a fascinating machlokes. Rabbi say before we go on, take a look at Rashi. Why would you stop women from blowing shofar? In other words, what's the problem here? Rashi says over here, Hanashim ma'akvin, de pturos legamre, de mitzvahs aseh shazman gramahu, v'chitaki ika baltosif. I will say we are about to enter into a fascinating, riveting machlokes about as follows. Everyone agrees with the following halacha, which is, women are exempt from mitzvahs aseh shazman grama. They are exempt from any time-bound mitzvah. The shaila is, what are the ramifications of that patur, of that exemption? Does that mean they're patur, but if they want to do it, they certainly can? Or do we say they're patur, and therefore because they're patur, if they were to perform a mitzvahs aseh shazman grama, it would be tantamount to baltosif, to adding on to mitzvahs. So watch this. Disanya daber b'nei Yisrael. So we'll say the pasuk that the Gemara is quoting over here is by smicha. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'marta aleim adam ki yakriv mikem karban la'Hashem and abehem and adbakar and atzon. Here's one mitzvah of smicha. Mitzvah of smicha is that when you offer a carbon, you are supposed to lean on the carbon, smicha. So the Gemara says, so listen to this, B'nei Yisrael somchin ve'in benos Yisrael somchos. Only men do smicha, women don't do smicha. Right? Women don't lean on the carbon. Di Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. These words of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Nashim somchos rishos. So Rabbi say, the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda is women don't do smicha, and if a woman were to do smicha, it would actually be a violation of Bal Tosif. On the other hand, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon say, Nashim somchos rishos. Women don't have to do smicha, but if they want to do smicha, they're absolutely permitted to do so. So we'll say what comes out over here is that this machlokes by smicha becomes a general machlokes by mitzvos aseh shazman grama. What is the nature of the patur? What is the nature of the exemption? Is it an exemption, but if they want to perform the mitzvah, they absolutely can? Or no, once a woman is exempted, she is halachically almost like forcibly exempted, and performance of that mitzvah would actually be a violation of Bal Tosef of adding on to mitzvah. So the Gemara is just pointing out this machlokes seems to be playing over here in the Mishnah as well, because the Mishnah says children, if they want to blow the shofar, can, but doesn't say anything about women, which would seem to indicate that according to the Tanna Kama in the Mishnah, a woman would not blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shabbos, on Rosh Hashanah, right? Ultimately, again, the Gemara suggests perhaps this is embedded in this machlokes of the nature of mitzvahs aseh shazman grama. So we'll say we know that we paskin that women are exempt from mitzvahs aseh shazman grama, but if a woman wants to gonna perform that mitzvah, she is absolutely permitted to do so. Not only that, but by Ashkenazim, not only is a woman permitted to do so, but what? She could even make a bracha on that. By Sfardim, the halacha is different, right? But by Ashkenazim, women could even make a bracha on mitzvah shazman grama. Now again, there's interesting discussions about does this apply to all mitzvah shazman grama? So tefillin, for example, is a very interesting discussion by women. Again, not for now, but just know that's how we come out in this machlokes. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. Aval misaskin bohem ad shilamdu. So we'll say. So the Mishnah says something very interesting. The Mishnah said that we don't prevent children from blowing the shofar. Rather, again, the Mishnah said aval misaskin bohen ad shilamdu. We actively involve ourselves with them until they learn how to blow. Says the Gemara, afilu b'Shabbos. Right? This is true even on Shabbos. So apparently, again, the child picks up a shofar on Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, so we go ahead and not only do we not prevent them, but we help them become proficient. Says the Gemara, Ve'in ma'akvines atinokos m'liskoa b'Shabbos, ve'in tzarach lomar b'yamtiv. So you will say, here's the problem. But we learned we don't prevent children from blowing on Shabbos, and certainly on Yom Tiv. Hagufa kasha. So I don't understand, which one is it? Misaskin ban at shilamdu v'afilu b'Shabbos, amalachatchila amrinan tiku v'ra'iv tiku. So we'll say, on one hand, the Mishnah is saying we involve ourselves with them to help them become proficient in becoming and blowing shofar, even on Shabbos, which sounds like lechatchila, we allow the children to blow the shofar on Shabbos. V'hadar tana, but then you say afterwards, ein ma'akvin, we don't prevent them. Ikuvahu de lo ma'akvin, halachatchila lo amrinon tiku. Both say that sounds like what? We don't prevent them, but what? We certainly don't proactively encourage it. So we'll say, see here this steer, like what's going on over here? We have one statement that says if the kid starts picking up the shofar and blowing it, we don't stop him from doing it. And then another statement that says we help them become proficient. So which one is it? To which the Gemara says, lo kasha, it's not a contradiction. Amud beis, kan bekatan she'yigiyah lechinuch, kan bekatan shelo yigiyah lechinuch. Very interesting. Two different types of kitanim. One is talking about a child who reached the age of chinuch. If that's the case, look at the top Rashi Lamed Gimel and Beis Katan Shegei Lechinuch Misaskin Bahen She'elamdu V'chol Shekein She'in Ma'akvin. See, Rabbosai, if a child reached the age of chinuch, we have a vested interest in him becoming proficient in the mitzvah of shofar. So therefore, again, if he's at the age of chinuch and he's blowing the shofar, that's when we get actively involved to help him develop the skill and become proficient. If he's, I will say, so I'll tell you something very interesting, by the way. Now you'll say to yourself, I don't understand. But I'll say, what's the mitzvah of chinuch? The mitzvah of chinuch is to teach my children to do mitzvahs. But I'll say, the overall majority of Klal Yisrael performs the mitzvah of Tkiyah Shofar how? By listening. by listening. But isn't this an incredible yesod in chinuch? Part of the key of chinuch in Yiddishkeit is to teach our children not to be spectators in Judaism, but to teach them to take an active role in Yiddishkeit, to teach them to take an active role in their spiritual development. You see, the mitzvah of chinuch, says the Gemara, is not teaching your child to listen to Tekiyah Shofar. Isn't this incredible? The mitzvah of chinuch by shofar is to teach your child to blow the shofar. Whether or not my child is going to go ahead and become a Baal Tokeya or not is irrelevant. That's the nature of the mitzvah of chinuch. Rabbi says, you'll say to yourself, I don't understand. But it seems to be unique by shofar, right? Because, for example, let's say by Megillah, no one says that there's an obligation of chinuch to teach my kid to read Megillah, right? Or there's an obligation to teach my kid how to build a sukkah, right? Why here? Because we'll say, what's shofar? What's such an incredible, you said, what's shofar? Shofar is uru yeshenim mishinaschem. Shofar is the call to tshuva. Shofar is the call to wake up, get out of the slumber, stop sleepwalking through life, take the reins of existence, maximize your potential. So when it comes to the mitzvah of shofar, the mitzvah of chinuch is to teach my child to blow, to teach my child not to be a shomeya, but to be a mashmiya, to teach my child to be a Baal Tokeya, to teach my child, don't drift through your Yiddishkeit, don't put on the cruise control of spirituality, become an actor, become a dominant force, become a Baal Tokeya in your life. Such an incredible yesod and so important. What we have to teach our children is not to be spectators in Yiddishkeit, but to teach our children to take an active role, to take an active interest, to become players, to become actors in the development of their own ruchnius. Such an incredible yesod. Versus the Mishnah that says that if my kid is going ahead and just playing with the shofar, I don't have to stop them from doing it. That's a young child. That's a child who has not reached the age of chinuch, in which case, again, there's no mitzvah for me to actively intervene to help them develop the skill. But lamaisa, again, I also don't have to stop them from doing so. Beautiful. So remember again, the Mishnah says, misasek, if you're misasek. Now, look at Rashi for just a moment. So remember the example I gave you before. Rashi says, misasek de lo yatsa, she'eno miskavin l'tkiyah. Misasek, Rabbi say, is the case where a person doesn't have kavanah to blow a tekiyah. Va'afilu delav mitzvah ela minabeach nabuche. Oh, she'eno. So Rabbi say, minabeach nabuche is the example I gave you before. You're kind of just like exhaling. You're exhaling or sighing or just blowing air with absolutely no kavanah to do anything. So what happens? Rashi says, "Va'alsa biyado tekiya." So, and you go produce. So I'll say now, go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara said, "Va'shomem misasek lo yatsa." Right? I'm sorry, I skipped. Va'misasek lo yatsa. Second line from the top. Right? So if you go ahead and you're just misasek, you're just blowing air into the shofar, and you produce kolos, you're not yotzei. So also, this is very interesting. The Gemara says, "Hatokei l'shir yatsa." Now, what you could infer from this is what? That what if you were blowing for the purpose of making music, right? But you found this incredible musical composition. It's called Tekiyah Shvarim Tekiyah. You love it, right? You love it, and you just keep blowing that. The shir. This is your intention to make music, not to blow kolos. Tatokei l'shir, or for that matter, I will say, any case, we're trying to produce sound for melodic purposes, and it just happens to be that you create kolos in your pursuit of creating shira. So you could infer from this that you would be yotzei, because the Mishnah says it's only misasek lo yotzei. Now let's remember again, what's the case of misasek? Misasek means you have kavanah pretty much for nothing, right? For nothing. You're just blowing air. You're just blowing air. It just happens to be that you produce kolos. So the Gemara infers it sounds like that if you had kavanah for something, let's say kavanah for melodic purposes, and you end up producing kolos, that you would be yotzei. To which the Gemara says, Dilma, Lema Masele Rava, say that this supports the position of Rava. The Amar Rava, Hatokeh L'shir Yatza. But say Rava is actually of the opinion that halacha l'maisa tokeh l'shir. If a person is blowing the shofar to produce music, and they end up blowing proper kolos, that they are yotzei. To which the Gemara says, Dilma, Tokea l'shir nami misasek karle. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe tokea l'shir, right, blowing for melodic purposes is also called misasek. And I both say, that is indeed how he paskin halacha l'maisa. The only way that you are yotzi the mitzvah of tekiah shofar is if you have in mind to blow the shofar and produce kolos for the sake of the mitzvah of shofar. So if you're just blowing air and you produce kolos, or you're blowing for melodic purposes, right, that's called misasek as well, which I both say is such a profound musar haskell, such a profound lesson, that even tokea l'shir is misasek. Right, I both say, remember again, before we got to this Gemara, what's our definition of misasek? What's our definition of misasek? Involved in totally non-constructive malacha, right? That's misasek. I'm just blowing air, but it just happens to be that I produce kolos, right? So I don't have kavanah for anything constructive. It produces a result. The Gemara says, well, that result is not halachically meaningful or significant. Now we've expanded misasek to mean any action that's not, or I should say, we'll call it any action that's not for the sake of the mitzvah. So for example, tokea l'shir is I have kavanah for something. What's my kavanah? To produce music. And what ends up happening? I end up producing kolos. So the Gemara says that's also called misasek. Which is fascinating, because remember, the classic case of misasek is I have kavanah for nothing. I'm just blowing air. But in the second case, now we've expanded misasek, includes even blowing air for the sake of producing music is also called misasek, which also tells you something amazing in life. That in life, you could be involved in something constructive, but if it's not the right use of your kochos, then that is not considered to be a spiritually constructive act. In other words, that sometimes in life, you have to be careful what you get involved in. Because there are many things that are meaningful, but they may not be the meaningful thing for me, right? And isn't this the great challenge of life? Because again, so many times, it happens to all of us, we get pulled into things that are important, but there's a limited amount of time, there's a limited amount of koach, and a person has to make a decision where they're going to put their energies. Because if I put my energies into the wrong thing, even if it's an important thing, then that's not the maximization of my potential. And that's the musar over here. Tokea l'shir is something constructive. I'm not just blowing air, I'm producing music. That's very nice. But if you're producing music, but what we require right now is producing tekiyas for Rosh Hashana, your music is not the right use of your potential. And so important in life, because on any given day, there's a million things that need to get done and a million things that require our attention. And how often does it happen that a day goes by and I was busy the whole day? Let's say, how often does it happen that I'm busy, but I don't feel accomplished? I'm busy, but I don't feel accomplished. And I think often if we unwind that, we unpackage that, that's because I'm often busy with the wrong things. I'm busy, and again, with good things. Not that I'm busy with good things, but they're not the right things that I need to plow my attention into. The whole day was occupied. I didn't waste the moment, but I don't feel accomplished because it was tokea l'shir. Tokea l'shir is also meaningful. It's just not the right use of time. That's the din of misasek. Life is all about figuring out what I need to do, where I need to put my kochos, the ability to say no to certain things, which are important, but not important for me right now, so that I could lead a life, ultimately, again, of maximized accomplishment. So the Gemara goes weiter. And if you hear from the misasek, you're not yotze, says the Gemara. So again, this says the Gemara, So it says it's very interesting. So the Mishnah said, if you hear from a misasek, you're not yotze. So we'll say, what does this sound like? So I hear Reuven blowing the shofar, but I know that he's blowing it l'shir. Okay, so obviously, again, he's not yotze, I'm not yotze. What can you infer from this? What if Reuven is blowing the shofar for himself? And it's clear he has kavanas to blow the shofar, but he doesn't have kavanah to be motzi me. He just has kavanah to be yotze himself. So it sounds like you would be yotze in that case. Lema tevet yufted Rabbi Zera. Both say this would seem to refute the position of Rabbi Zera. Dam Rabbi Zera l'shameh, because also we had this Gemara a few days ago. Rabbi Zera said to his attendant, "Ichaven v'tokin li." Right? Rabbi Zera said to his attendant, "Go ahead and have kavanah and blow the shofar on my behalf." Which sounds like what? In order for someone to be motzi me, the blower, the Baal Tokeya, has to have explicit kavanah to be motzimi. So Dilma, I did the Tanarisha Misasek, Tani Seifa Nami Misasek. The Gemara says you're right. It could just be the Mishnah used Misasek as a lashon just to preserve Mishnaic symmetry, but doesn't really mean Misasek. So both say, so in other words, halacha lamaisa, and this is halacha lamaisa. Obviously, same way that the Misasek is not Yotze for himself, he obviously what? Can't be motzi someone else, can't discharge someone else's obligation. But I will say, but again, even more than that, if somebody has kavanah to be motzi themselves, but doesn't have kavanah to be motzi the listener is not yotze either. We did this sugya before, right? This was the shliach tzibur batokea, the personal batokea, good. But let's say Mishnah. But let's say now we get a little bit into the halachas of tkiyah shofar, quite beautiful. So seder tkiyah shalosh. So we'll say that the seder of tkiyah shofar are 3 sets of 3 sounds. We've already established before, we pass like Rabbi Akiva. Remember that what? We blow shofar during malchios, zichronos, and shofros. So 3 blowings, right? 3 blowings, and each of those blowings is comprised of 3 sounds, for a total of 9 kolos. 9 kolos. So we're going to see midda oraisa. I know what you're thinking, 9, we blow 100. So remember, again, we'll discuss how we get to that 100, but midda oraisa, all you need is 9 sounds. So that's the shalosh, shalosh. Shir tekiah, how long is a tekiah? Kishalosh truos. A tekiah is like 3 truos. Now I will say, we're going to have to see what that means, because that is 1 long tekiah, right? 1 tekiah is like, we'll see what that means in the Gemara. Shir trua, kishalosh yevavos. The shir of a trua is like 3 yevavos. Now both say, yevava we're going to see is a cry. But we're going to see this machlokes as to what crying means exactly. We've seen this case so many times. So remember again, the way it's going to work, right? What are the 9 kolos that you need midaraisa? It's very simple. Tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah. That's it. That's what you need. So we've seen this case before. So I have a great idea. I'm up to the first set. I blow tekiah, trua. I'm up to the last tekiah of the first set. I have a great chap. Save a little bit of time, right? I'm going to blow a double tekiah. That way, it could take care of my last tekiah of the first set and what? The first tekiah of the second set. We've seen this before already. So the Gemara says, in biyado ela achos. No, doesn't work. That's only going to be considered as what? 1 tekiah. 1 tekiah. As we've seen already in the Gemara, Chazal have a lot of power. What they can't do, however, is to take 1 long sound and make it into 2. Misha berach. Both say, what happens if during Musaf you didn't have a shofar? During Musaf, that's what it means, Misha Berach, right? Somebody daven, they daven Musaf already, and they don't have a shofar. And then you get a shofar after davening. So tekeya umaria bitokea shalosh pamim. So you blow shofar after davening, right? 3 sets of 3 kolos. So we'll say, in other words, what was the havamina? The havamina was of the Mishnah that maybe the mitzvah of tekiya shofar only applies when? During Musaf. Because remember, I will say, I want to be clear, that the institution of Tkiyah Shofar was embedded in Musaf. Malchios, Zichronos, and Shofaros, right? That's how, again, we don't really have time to get into this, but again, I want to point out that, remember, the original institution also of Tkiyah Shofar was they were blowing shofar during the silent Shmona Esrei, which is quite incredible. Again, there are still some in Hagim to do that today, right? During silent Shmona Esrei. So again, the Havamina was, maybe if you didn't have shofar by Musaf, maybe you don't blow at all. No, if you don't have shofar by Musaf, you just blow after Musaf, 9 kolos after Musaf. Kishem. So the Gemara says, Kishem sheshliach tzibur chayiv, kach chul yochid v'yochid chayiv. And I will say, this is now transitioning from shofar to davening. The same way that the shliach tzibur is obligated in davening, every individual is chayiv in davening as well. Which I will say, the Tanakama is saying is, that for Musaf of Rosh Hashana, for any Tzilas Rosh Hashana, we don't rely on discharging our obligation by listening to the Shliach Tzibur, listening to the Chazan, but every person should daven on their own. Rabbi Gamliel Omer, Shliach Tzibur motzi es harabim midei chavasan. Rabbi Gamliel says, no, on Rosh Hashana, the Shliach Tzibur has the ability to go ahead and discharge everyone's obligation. Good, we'll analyze that as well. Says the Gemara. So we'll say, let's talk about the tekiah. Because remember again, what did the Mishnah say? What's the shir of a tekiah? What's the shir of a tekiah? 3 truos. 3 truos. The Gemara says, whoa. Vatanya shir tekiah kitrua. Yet Rabbi say, we know, we have another brayso that says, what's the shir of a tekiah? Shir of a tekiah is a teruah. Is a teruah. Not 3 teruos, but what? 1 teruah. To which Gemara says, no. Amar Abaye Tana Didan Kachashiv Tekiya Dekulhu Bavi Utruos Dekulhu Bavi Tani Bra Kachashiv Chad Bava Visulo. To which Abaye responds, no. When the Mishnah said that the shear of a tekiya is like 3 truos, what it was saying is like this. The shear of each tekiya, of the 3 tekiyas, because remember again, the Mishnah says, how many sounds do you need? How many kol in Rosh Hashana? 9. 3 sets of tekiya, trua, tekiya. So when the Mishnah said that the shear of a tekiya is like 3 truos, what it meant was the shear of each tekiya is like each of the 3 truos. He's just framing it as 3 tekiyos, 3 truos. The Brisa was saying 1 tekiya, 1 teruah, but they're saying the same thing, which is how long is the tekiya? What's the length of a tekiya? It's a 1 teruah. Now, both say it's actually interesting. Halacha l'maisa. Okay, we don't have time for all these halachas now, but I'll just say something interesting. The shear of a tekiya is a subjective kol, which means the tekiya only has to be as long as whatever the middle sound is. So as we go ahead and we go through this sugya, we will see, for example, the tekiya, when you're blowing tekiya, shvarim trua tekiya, that tekiya of a shvarim trua set is longer than, let's say, the tekiya of a shvarim set, right? And the tekiya of a shvarim set is going to be shorter than the tekiya of a trua set. So it's just very interesting to see. The tekiya is the one subjective kol that has to mirror the length of whatever is in the middle of that seder. Good. Let's go right there. So shir truck gimel yavama. So we'll say, listen to this Gemara, incredible Gemara. So remember again. So now we have right halacha number 1. So halacha number 1 is you only need 9 kolos. That's number 1. Halacha number 2, the shir of a tekiya is like a trua, which is another way of saying about. Because remember again, we'll see. But the shir of a tekiya is a trua, which is another way halachically of saying the shir of the tekiya is the shir of whatever the middle sound is. Next halacha, shir teruah kigimel yavavos. What is a trua? A trua is like 3 cries. 3 cries. So it says the Gemara, Vatanya, shir trua kishlosha shvarim. But yet we learned elsewhere that the shir of a trua is not like 3 yavavos, but it's like 3 shvarim. Okay, so what's going on over here? So it says the Gemara, listen to this. This is a machlokes. I will say this is such an incredible Gemara. The shir of a trua is subject to a fundamental machlokes. Tichsiv Yom Teruah Yelachem. Torah says when it comes to Rosh Hashana, calls it a Yom Teruah. Umetargaminon. And I will say, how do we translate the word Teruah? Yom Yevava. Then I will say, what does Yevava mean? Yevava means a cry. A cry. So the Gemara says, Yom Levava Yevava Yulachon. Uksiv. And I will say, now, how do we define Yevava? Uksiv Be'imei de Sisra. And I will say, it says about the mother of Sisra. Right? The mother of Sisra. I will say, Haftar Rosh Hashana. Mother of Sisra, Ba'ad hachalo nishkafa, v'atiyavev aim Sisra. So remember again, we know the story. Sisra was the Gentile general, who was defeated by Devorah and Baruch, right? He's murdered ultimately again by Devorah, right? Devorah lures him into the tent, and he's murdered there. So the Navi describes a very moving scene. Ba'ad hachalo nishkafa. Sisra's mother is waiting by the windowsill for her son to come home. And the lashon of the pasuk was quoted here. Madua, right? She's sitting by the ba'adachal nishkafa. Vatiyavev aim Sisra. Aim Sisra's mother cries, and she says, Madua bo sheshrich malavo. Where is my son's chariot? She's sitting at the window crying. So once I see here the drasha Yom Teruah, we translate the Targum translates trua as Yevava. And we find the word Yevava by the mother of Sisra. Vatiyavev im Sisra. So we'll say, okay, so what does Vatiyavev mean? Says the Gemara, Mar Savar Genuchei Ganach. So one opinion says, what is Tiyavev? Tiyavev is Genuchei Ganach. Now we'll say, what is Genuchei Ganach? Take a look at Rashi. Genuchei Ganach, Rashi says, Man Damar Sharm Savar Genuchei Ganach, Ke Adam Hagoneach Milibo. Kederach hacholim shema'arichin begini chosehen. So we'll say one opinion says Vatiyavev means long, prolonged sighs, like the sigh of a person who is ill. Which Abbas resembles what sound? Shvarim. Do. Like the sighing of a chola. Umar sabar Yelule Yalil. And the other opinion says, no, vatiyavev means what? Look at Rashi. Yelule yalu, ke'adam habochem akonin kolos ksarim stumin zelazeh. It means more of like a repetitive crying, right? More of like a sobbing, but not like a prolonged sob. What do they call it? Like a staccato? They go whimper, yeah, but it's like a bunch of cries one after the other, right? So we'll say, so that's also again, which is what sound? Teruah. Tu. So we'll say, so this is the machzor. Isn't this incredible? You see, the Torah only requires us to go ahead and sound one sound, which is what? Teruah. So just remember this limud. Teruah. That's why it sounds the teruah. What's a teruah? A yevava. What's a yevava? Vatiyavevim sisra. How was she crying? Was she sighing? Like ultimately, again, like a shvarim, like a person who's ill and just lets out a sound of desperation, tu, or was she crying in rapid succession, like a sobbing, multiple small sounds, one after the other, like a teruah. So now you begin to see why we have to blow so many sounds. For one simple reason, we don't know what the meaning of teruah is. Is it what we call shvarim, the sighing? Is it what we call teruah? What we call teruah, the sobbing? Or Rabbi said there's a third possibility, which is what? It's both shvarim, teruah. So therefore, Rabbi say what ends up happening over here is we know I have to blow 9 sounds. Is it 9 of what we call tekiah, teruah, tekiah? Is it 9 of tekiah, shvarim, tekiah? Or is it 9 of tekiah, shvarim, teruah, tekiah? And then once we're doing that, we throw in a couple of other things also. I'll say, but again, because there's a whole discussion also, just to tell you this very quickly, even in shvarim, teruah itself. The shaila with shvarim, teruah is it neshima achos? Is it shtei neshimos? Is it blown as one rapid sound? Or is there a pause in the middle of a shvarim, teruah? So again, we're trying to satisfy all of these things. I'll just point out something absolutely amazing very quickly because I want to get on to the next staff. Very quickly, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, isn't it incredible that the mother of Sisra is like the source for our Hilchos Shofar, right? I will say the mother of Sisra, to raise a Sisra and to be proud of your son who's a Sisra means you're not exactly a woman of the highest moral caliber, right? And yet, isn't it amazing that the entire Tekiah Shofar is modeled after Rabbi Soloveitchik says something so amazing. The mother of Sisra waits by the windowsill for her son's chariot. And when you look at the Navi, she's convincing herself that Sisra's coming back. He's coming home. Deep down, she knows her son is dead. She knows he's been defeated. She knows he's not coming back. But she continuously convinces herself, no, it'll be fine, he's coming home. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, you know what the dynamic of tshuva is? We go through life convincing ourselves that certain things are okay. I go through life convincing myself that certain actions I engage in, certain behaviors, certain relationships, it's fine. We sit by the windowsill, often convincing ourselves of certain things in life. And you know what happens on Rosh Hashana? Vatiyavevim Sisra. What happens on Rosh Hashana, you see, there was that moment when the Sisra's mother realized, my son's not coming home. Life as I knew it is over. And the whole dynamic of Rosh Hashana is, at a certain point in time, the veil comes down, the curtain comes down, and I have to acknowledge the way I'm living, what I'm doing, and what needs to be repaired. Isn't that, says the Rav, the entire dynamic of Rosh Hashana? The entire dynamic of Yom Noraim is having that mother of Sisra moment, where I realize the delusions are just that, they're delusions. And now I have to face the reality of my life, of what I am and what I'm not, and find the courage to move myself forward. Rabbanon, so the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanon, Minayin Shebeshofar, how do you know, let's go quickly, how do you know that on Rosh Hashanah you have to blow the shofar? In other words, how do you know that it's with the shofar? Remember, all the Torah says is Yom Teruah. How do you know it's a shofar? Talmud Lomar, V'avarta shofar Teruah. Because the pasuk says you shall sound the shofar Teruah. That's very nice, but that pasuk is not by Rosh Hashanah. Where is that pasuk? I've seen this. Where is that pasuk by? Yom Kippur of Yovel. Amy Ela Yovel. But Rosh Hashanah means I only know that you have to use a shofar by Yovel. How do you know you have to use a shofar in Rosh Hashanah? Talmud Lomar B'chodesh Hashvi. The pasuk says on the 7th month. On the 7th month, She'in Talmud Lomar B'chodesh Hashvi, because the pasuk didn't need to say the 7th month. Uma Talmud Lomar B'chodesh Hashvi, which is Tishrei. She'i Yukol Truos Shel Chodesh Shvi Zeh Kazeh. Teaches us an incredible and overwhelming Yisrael, which is what? Which is that halacha l'maisa. Yankee. Michael's not here. So, which tells us that halacha l'maisa, what? That all of the shofar blowing on Rosh Hashanah, on the 7th month, should be like this, which I will say. So essentially, what the Torah is doing over here is combining all of the shofar blasts of month number 7 to tell you that they're all the same. So once I know by Yovel, ultimately again, it's going to be Rosh Hashanah, it's going to be a shofar. So too by Yom Kippur, just like by Yom Kippur of Yovel, it's going to be a shofar. So too by Hashana, it's going to be a shofar. How do you know? So all the Torah says is trua. How do you know? Ultimately, again, you have to blow a tekiah before and then a tekiah after, or I should say tekiah before. And Talmud Lomar va'avarta. So I will say va'avarta is very interesting. The lashon of va'avarta means you shall sound a straight sound, like a ma'avar, a pathway. Va'avarta shofar trua. How do you know that you have to go ahead and blow a tekiah afterwards? Talmud Lomar ta'aviru shofar. The pasuk says, you shall sound. I will say, so it's interesting. The lashon of ta'aviru, the Gemara understands it means tekiah, a straight sound. Ve'imli ela b'yovel. Now I only know that this is true on Yovel. So I will say, so remember again, remember, how do I know that on Rosh Hashanah we blow a shofar? Where do I know that from? Where do I know that from? From Yovel. The Torah says use a shofar on Yovel, and the Torah says an extra Chodesh Hashvi, 7th month, to teach us that any blowing that happens on the 7th month Tishrei is done with a shofar. So the Gemara says, furthermore, I only know by Yovel you have to go ahead and blow a tekiah before the Truah and blow a tekiah after the Truah. So it says the Gemara, Rosh Hashanah, how do I know that I have to blow a tekiah before the Truah and a tekiah after the Truah, even on Rosh Hashanah? Talmud Lomar b'chodesh hashvi. The pasuk says in the 7th month, top of Lamed Daled, Shein Talmud Lomar b'chodesh hashvi. You didn't need that phrase at all. Umat Talmud Lomar b'chodesh hashvi. Why does it say on the 7th month? Shiyu kol Truas hachodesh hashvi zeh. To teach us that what? All shofar blowing on the 7th month is the same. So what's really fascinating over here is a lot of the mechanistic details about Tekiah shofar are going to be learned from Yovel. But once I have them by Yovel, then what? The extraneous phrase B'chodesh Hashvi'i allows me to apply all of the halachos of Yovel to Tekiah shofar of Rosh Hashanah. Uminayin l'shalosh, shel shalosh. And I will say, remember again, the Mishnah told me, what do you have to do for Tekiah shofar? 3 units of 3 sounds each. Tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah, tekiah, trua, tekiah. How do you know that? So the most is Talmud Omar, va'avarta shofar trua. So number 1, va'avarta shofar trua, Shabbason zichron trua, Yom trua yelochem. Both sides the Torah says trua 3 times. So from here I know that you have to blow 3 truos, and I've already learned that what? There's no such thing as blowing a standalone trua. If you're going to blow a trua, what does it require? What does it require? A tekiah before, a tekiah afterwards. That gives me 9 sounds. Here's the problem. Some of the truas are written by Rosh Hashanah. Some of the truas are written by Yovel. All of the tekiyas are written by Yovel. How do I know that I could combine all of these halachas together? Again, Talmud Lomar, Shvi'i l'gezerah shava. Both say Shvi'i teaches me a gezerah shava between Yovel and Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara says, HaKetzad, Shalosh Shein Teisha. Shir, so the Gemara says, how do we know this? This is 3 sounds, 3 truos, which in reality are really 9 sounds, because 3 truos, each which require a tekiah beforehand, are going to give you a total of 9 sounds. Shir tekiah kitrua. The shir of a tekiah is like a trua. Shir trua kishalosh shvarim. And the shir of a trua is like 3 shvarim. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Hai tana meikara maisila be'akesha. I will say, when we originally started this, we started learning this out. The limud began with a hekish. I will say hekish is a comparison between Rosh Hashanah and Yovel. And what ended up happening? V'hashta ma'isle l'gzerah shava. Then you made a gzerah shava of shvi. So I will say, remember again, these are 2 different exegetical principles. So which one is it? Is it a hekish or is it a gzerah shava? Hachikam is what it means to say. Ilav gzerah shava hava ma'sinala behekesha. If I didn't have a gzerah shava, which is even better, I could have learned that from a hekish. Hashta the asya gzerah shava hekesh shalotzah. But now that I have a gzerah shava, ultimately I don't need a hekesh. Beautiful. The high tana ma'isla gzerah shava midbar. Shabbos said there's another tana that learns out these halachas from a gzerah shava to the desert. Watch this. Tisanya, because we learned utekatem trua. You will go ahead and you will blow the trua. Shabbos said this is talking about when they will blow the trua to have the camp move, to have the camp travel. Utekatem trua, tekiah bifnei atzma, utrua bifnei atzma. Right? You blow a tekiah by itself and a trua by itself. So the Gemara says, Ata omer tekiah bifnei atzma, trua bifnei atzma, o eino ela tekiah a trua achasi. maybe tekiah and trua are all the same sound, one long sound. Kishu omer bahakil esakal tisko velo tariu. They will say the fact that sometimes you blow a tekiah and not a trua, and sometimes a trua without a tekiah indicates to us what? They are separate and distinct sounds. Havi omer tekiah bifnei atzma or trua bifnei atzma. These are separate and distinct sounds. Uminayin shepshuta lefanah. How do you know that for a trua you blow a tekiah beforehand? Right? Talmud lomar utekatem trua. Uminayin shepshuta lachara. How do you know that the trua requires a tekiah afterwards? Talmud lomar trua yisku. All right, we'll stop over here for today. But as we're going to see again, although the primary limud comes from the Gzera Shava of Chodesh Hashi from Yovel, we're going to see other Tanaim ultimately have other proof texts for this. So we'll stop here. Emir Hashem, our goal is tomorrow to finish the Masechta. Emir Hashem, B'Shatov, Mitzlachos. Hold on, Emir Hashem. 5:45. 5 o'clock. No, 5:45. We'll do it. Emir Hashem. Shach Avosai.